AI in GTM is not overhyped. Actually, quite the opposite. Much harder to get to great results with AI than it looks on the surface. The kids call the self-cleaning CRM. I'm not even posting about it on LinkedIn because I think it just sounds absolutely ridiculous and I just see it working. Trust me, I see it. I don't go in and change prompts or change these pieces of the system. I ask my context OS, based on what we learned, update these pieces so they incorporate the learnings that we got. And only having to have those conversations and then quote unquote magically the tech updating itself. And when you as a marketer do something like that versus saying, oh, I'm sending marketing emails to everybody who was ever on the deal versus I'm sending marketing emails to everybody above a certain seniority and who have this specific function. You go from a list of 12,000 to a list of 2,000. And it's not, oh, it's a smaller list. It's the list you care about. I think these have to be CEO or CRO initiatives. First thing. If it's not on that level of importance for the company, they don't have problems worth solving in GTM.
This is the Terminal Velocity Podcast. Terminal velocity is the fastest a falling object can go in free fall. It's the point where the drag from the air balances out gravity so it stops accelerating. And the terminal, the command line, is where go-to-market is hitting its top speed right now. So that's the show. Operators walking through the AI workflows that are actually moving the needle and calling out what's just hype. No vendors, no pitch decks, just the people building it. I'm Jacob Tuweiner and I run Sculpted, the team behind Pipeline OS. We enrich your CRM and then score every account and contact against your own fit criteria and timing signals so you can prioritize who to sell to and reach the right person at the right time. Then we keep it clean with always on enrichment, a self-cleaning CRM that gets smarter every month. So if your reps are working accounts that aren't a fit and you're losing pipeline because of it, that's the problem we solve. Want it fixed? You can book a call with me at sculpted.agency. There's a link right on the site or just message me on LinkedIn. By the way, every play we ship goes out free in my newsletter. Scoring models, Claude code guides, plugins, skills, all of it. And new episodes land there first too. Link is in the description or join the inside list at sculpted.agency/newsletter.
We appreciate it.
I've been seeing you since the early days of Clay, at least when I found Clay a few years ago. So you were definitely one of the first adopters in Clay. I saw you in the Clay Slack and on LinkedIn posting about it. I'm excited to chat with you as you've seen GTM tech evolve over the last few years. You were actually the person who inspired me to jump on Claude Code, actually. I was only building in Clay for years. And I saw my feed started blowing up with Claude Code, and I was like, might be cool, but I'm not a software engineer, so could I really use this? But when I saw your post about your context OS, which I want to ask you more about, I saw that you were able to sync, I think, client meetings, Slack threads, and whatnot, and then create your own sort of client portal, if you will, that has all of this context stored from natural language all over the place in one unified view that also can update the original SOW to keep people in line with what's actually happening and how work's progressing against the original promise, which is super hard if you're in the services business or really any project like stakeholder management. Insanely hard. I saw you built that, it looked like quite easily. That inspired me to jump in and get going with Claude Code. I'd love for you to maybe introduce yourself and what you do and Snowball Consult, and then we can get into the questions.
Yeah, happy to do that. So Snowball Consult, solo operator, the way I frame it is I plan, build, and implement GTM data systems for small TAM, high ACV companies.
Nice.
Fancy words, right? What does it basically mean? I think some of what we do is very clearly an overlap. I guess we have maybe different spins on it, but overall, for example, one thing that's always part of my engagements is what the kids call the self-cleaning CRM, which is, I'm not even posting about it on LinkedIn because I think it just sounds absolutely ridiculous and I just see it working and basically have it open in another browser window. Trust me, I see it. But the point is, and I guess we're going to come to that later in our conversation, but I think it's just outrageous to see that tagline, self-cleaning CRM, whatever. That sounds nice, but it's no way that's actually going to work. But I see it working, and it's just a lot of work to get there. And that is when I say a GTM data system that can be a GTM data system. It can mean many things, but this is one of the modules, I would say, that's really valuable, really powerful, and this is the type of thing I'm building. I hope this was brief enough.
Yeah, super helpful. Would love to dive into it a bit further in terms of how you manage context with Claude and perhaps how that's fueling your work with the self-cleaning CRM. I'm not sure if they're separate things you want to talk about or if they're unified, but I think the first broad topic I want to cover is where you see AI really moving the needle in go-to-market, how you're actually using it successfully for yourself and for your clients, and that we could just talk about that until we feel like we've exhausted the topic and then move into more of some of the pitfalls and ways that maybe it's not so useful.
Yeah, sounds good. And I think it will very naturally or quickly go to the pitfalls in all of this modern GTM. But where to get to your question, so a few things in there. First, I want to, if somebody like contextualize, what does it mean, right? So first, I got the term from Jacob Dietl, Dietle, and he's a very forward thinker on that. He actually has a very software engineering background, and I caught a lot of my thinking about that from him. I just want credit where credit's due. That being said, let's just use the term for lack of a better word. What it basically does, not to make it too fancy, but allows me to have any digital asset have awareness of each other. So I'm trying to make it very concrete with an example, right? Let's just do a thing that whatever, a routing decision for a CRM build, right? How do you route a certain lead, a certain account, whatever, a lead, obviously. This little thing, it's basically a prompt. Maybe let's call it a really fancy prompt that can do some of this work, right? And that thing, imagine you don't build that in isolation, but you actually produce this little piece of the data pipeline, this little piece of the puzzle, and it has awareness to the ICP definition or the ideal persona definition or definitions that are also in the context to us that you have worked towards with the client based on interviews and based on data and fusing that together and having a approved, agreed upon version. All of this, like being able to talk to each other and to have awareness of each other, not AI can think awareness, right? But just documents talking to each other. It's incredibly powerful. I think everybody wants this. It was just impossible before because of the natural language processing. And I know it's only a very small subset of what AI can do, but it's so powerful to have all you do not being in isolation anymore, but actually somebody slacks me something and it would say, oh, you are building this routing this way, but actually you just got a DM 2 days ago that said, hey, we need to turn that dial a little bit up or down, or we want to exclude a certain category or whatever, right? This type of stuff where in theory, you would always have great notes from conversations and great notes and insights from data and incorporate that into what you are building. Practically, that's just not what we can do. At least I think I'm the rule and not the exception. That's just very hard to get right. And this is, I wouldn't say a solved problem, but it's 10 times whatever X better because it's much more effortless to have all of these individual pieces have awareness of each other. Did that make it a little bit more, I guess, vivid, what I mean by context OS?
Yeah, for sure. I think it'd be interesting to know maybe a more concrete example of why this is so powerful. You mentioned it's very impactful. I'm curious some of the use cases, or you mentioned a routing use case, but why does this help with routing more than, I don't know, the old way of doing it was perhaps with a crazy Zapier flow, or maybe a massive clay table with a billion columns, or I don't know, maybe a lean data routing flow. I'm just curious how having the context OS actually helps with this example, or maybe you want to give a different one, but just the impact there.
I can talk about many of these little examples, but I think this is actually a great one, and I love how you asked the question. So first thing, it doesn't replace the execution of GTM. I'm not running GTM as much on ContextOS or on top of Claude Code as others. I still run a lot in Clay because I really appreciate the platform overall, even though there's a lot of friction from Claude Code to Clay and the other way around. But that is less important for me than the other part, and I want to get very concrete. So for example, when you look at a software point solution for a certain thing of all the things that my data builds do, they, from a perspective of technically, oftentimes they are really good solutions for that. But when you just take a routing decision, and I'm going to make a very concrete example, but let's say you sell into entities, or your client sells into companies where one domain has many different buying entities, right? That's more usual than not. And technically,
do you mean like one massive company with many subdivisions that could have different?
Correct. There's a few different ways you can implement that from a data schema from a data schema perspective, right? But let's just shelve that for a moment. And let's say at one point there is a routing decision somewhere. A lead's coming in, whatever, maybe a champion that has moved into this company or somebody coming in from an inbound form or whatever, anything like that, right? And you have one entity that falls under the same domain, but they have 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 buying entities beneath it. Or maybe it's the contract type, the lead that comes in and has to be put into a certain sub-entity. That is business taste. That is something where technically you can, for example, just say, oh, just put the lead into the entity with the most contacts or the most recently contacted or whatever, where you use a code-based approach. That is a solved problem. But when you think about how do we want that routing to happen, the nuance of that, this is where to go to your other question, to be very concrete, where I'm really hyperventilating when I talk about it, where it's so powerful. Imagine the flow, and it's really that. And I'm not saying it's the best flow, but it works so well. So I talk to the client. We realize, okay, this is the thing we want to build. I start building the thing and I get to some level of results and I run these results by my client. So this is actually a bigger topic that we actually only should approach things that are worth solving, because the way I do it, it takes bandwidth from my client. Otherwise, I don't know how to do it. And if we have to tackle problems where that's worth it. Let's say this is one of these problems. I'm running this data and I'm putting the data. How does my initial build, what is the output? 100 examples, a random sample of the data we are looking at. And I throw this, basically I use my context OS and say, here's what Clay produced. I just give it the URL of that Clay table because Clay doesn't do it natively and I hate it, but I need it. So what I do is it extracts with some custom scripts that are at the end all the data from the table and puts it into a Google Sheet for easy review, because most people that are the subject matter experts don't have access to the Clay workspace I'm working in. And then they have this, here's the data we want. This is what Andy's AI thing produced. Is the result correct? Is it incorrect? Is maybe the AI right? But now that we look at it, we were actually wrong in the original labeling, things like that, right? And the amazing thing is, with this human in the loop process, I guide it in a way that I read out loud the domain we are talking about, the company we are talking about, that AI can really follow along what the input is for. And then I ingest that conversation and I update all the artifacts, not Claude artifacts, pieces of the puzzle that I'm building, right? The building blocks. It updates all of these. Maybe there is a formula that needs to transform some data that is then ingested by an AI column that actually makes the routing decision. And all of these pieces, based on the updated input I'm getting from my client, what's right, what's wrong, how do we need to change it, I don't go in and change prompts or change these pieces of the system. I ask my context OS, based on what we learned, update these pieces so they incorporate the learnings that we got. And it's just too good to be true to what degree of accuracy you can push little decisions like that. And when you when you do that for all the important parts of such a data pipeline, where you want to have a human in the loop to not trust AI to make the right decision, but where you can really have the hands on the steering wheel. What is right? What is wrong? How does good look like for us? And only having to have those conversations and then quote unquote magically the tech updating itself based on that conversation. Of course I have to guide it, of course I have to exercise judgment, and sometimes it goes wrong and I have to take over the steering wheel, but that was impossible before. What's the additive of a context OS versus a vendor solution, which would only do it in a one-size-fits-all way?
So just to maybe bring it home, if I could give an example from my understanding of what you're saying, you have a file on your computer, perhaps in a GitHub repo or something, a folder essentially of maybe their personas, their account ICP qualification criteria. In this example of a large organization with perhaps many different subdivisions within it, that could be different buying committees. Typically what I found is different keywords and titles could mean a certain department of the business, this operations team versus whatever. And there's a nuance there that maybe would require some human judgment, so to speak, on where things should really route versus just a plain if-then logic. It requires a bit of taste, which you can use now natural language to update. That being said, it still requires a bit of human in the loop logic. So you can have your repo with all of your initial download of their ICP. Create your best guess at a routing workflow and create 100 sample outputs, give it to them, hop on a call and actually run through it with them, capture the transcript, and then maybe it was 90% accurate, you can capture the failure modes, and then automatically update the rules in a prompt somewhere in your pipeline based on that call without having to log in and click a billion buttons again. That's essentially, is that correct, what you're saying? Or am I missing something?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So that's very cool. That's how I use it too. It's been unbelievably powerful. I feel like AI can really help there. For someone who's not in Clay all day long, who's maybe their marketing leader or sales leader, they've heard of Clay, maybe they've used it a bit, but that problem, the only reason that you and I really get it is because we both spent hours and hours and hours and hours in Clay doing this over and over again. Why should a marketer or sales leader care about this?
So first, you remember when I said it has to be a big enough problem or an important enough problem to solve? I think that answers a little bit that question. It should be the things that increase organization-wide efficiencies. When you think about data quality, it's an unsexy topic, and it's also, I think there is at the moment no way around spending a few attention coins on that, and that's just very hard. But I think the downstream effects elevate the whole organization. You have less waste on people going after the wrong accounts, you have more accurate reporting. We would make a whole session about what are the benefits of clean data in your system of record, right? But let's just safe it to say, when you work on these things in earnest, you produce efficiencies across the whole org, and I would say every function gets faster or better or more precise. Like, the benefits are really not touching only one part of the org. They are touching all parts. And if you're a marketer, you can market to a much more precise group. You don't only have to say, oh, let's email everybody who was ever attached to a deal or something. You can say, oh, let's market people where we defined, and I will make it very quick, but I want to go on a concrete tangent here, right? I'll give you one example. You know this as well as I. A title is an interesting beast data-wise because it codifies or encodes two things: seniority and role. And it's actually not that trivial. So I want to say, I don't want to elevate the stuff that I'm doing as, oh yeah, I'm this rocket scientist and I'm doing this, but it's still not trivial, the stuff. This is how I would draw the line, right? And when you think about a title classifier of this is the seniority, it's relatively easy to do seniority, but this is the actual function the person has. You go very quickly into very domain specific territory. So when you sell to private equity, that looks different to break out the role from a title than when you sell to SMB or you sell to a Fortune 500 to a certain division or whatever, right? So there's already a lot of very minute work. You can use AI to make it much better, much more accurate. And when you, as a marketer, do something like that versus saying, oh, I'm sending marketing emails to everybody who was ever on the deal versus I'm sending marketing emails to everybody above a certain seniority and who have this specific function. You go from a list of 12,000 to a list of 2,000. And it's not, oh, it's a smaller list. It's the list you care about. And this is just the example that you said, and you can build all of this to such high precision. Yeah, that's what I want to say about it. It went in the right direction.
The precise list means higher deliverability, more opens, more alignment with your message to your market that you're sending to, et cetera, more conversions, et cetera, all that good stuff.
Correct. Efficiency.
I think some of the common use cases for AI that I've seen are using it to define two account properties that are super important, which is horizontal and vertical. Horizontal meaning, are they a SaaS company? Are they an agency? Are they a traditional brick and mortar business, e-commerce business? What type of company are they? And they could be, you could have SaaS in healthcare and you could have SaaS in construction. They're not industries. SaaS is a type. It's a horizontal classification. Vertical classification industry is healthcare versus construction. You could have a construction company, traditional business, or you can have a SaaS company that sells into construction. So those on the company type segmentation are really valuable. AI is great at that. And then you can say, depending on the account type or industry, these titles mean different things. And this is the kind of information that I would be storing in my context OS. On the job title side, the two fields you mentioned you can extract from title are seniority or persona. But these are really, I think, powerful. Before we get into pitfalls of AI and where it goes wrong, I think one more question is, what is the bad alternative that we had to do before we had the context OS, or we were able to use Claude in this way? What were you doing before you discovered Claude Code, and why are you so excited about this? What is the transformation that you've seen or experienced for yourself or for your clients?
And that just to your concrete question, what did we do before? We did shit before. Like, we just tried to cobble this together with what we had on our hands, on our minds, or it just basically didn't happen. So I think we're comparing something. When you were IBM, you could build all of that with 50 engineers, but of course you didn't do that because it probably wasn't worth it. So I think it just hasn't happened before.
Yeah, I think before it was, you had the context living in Slack threads, and meetings get to remember it and put it all together, put together maybe some sort of central document by hand. It just took forever. And then to make changes, you have to go into a tool and click around. Now I can give it the meeting transcript, give it their ICP PDF that they gave me, their website, and our Slack threads, and just basically everything, and then say, here's what I want to go and do with this, do it, and then it will spit out a great scoping document or a great workflow flowchart, and it's all living in one place and saved that I can now reference and build off of. And now in the future, when I want to tweak something, it's amazing. And then components of the workflow, classification of company type or job title for persona seniority, I actually will map the fields to the customer CRM with them, pull in the, let's say, seniority value, and maybe a persona value is a better example because it's always custom. Research and operations versus legal versus whatever. And I can make a prompt with those values saying, if the title has any of these keywords, classify into this persona bucket versus persona bucket, and create a golden data set with the customer with edge cases and run the prompt against that list, and then figure out, hey, it was 95% accurate. There was 5 that were wrong. And this is why they were misclassified. Let's try and tweak this prompt and test again to see if we can improve the accuracy without regression. I think a lot of these concepts are actually really hard to perhaps visualize just of us talking about it.
Data in their GTM. And that is such a foundational thing, right? But I think it most of the time is accepted that, okay, all right or good enough is good enough, and because the person, quote unquote, responsible for this part of GTM doesn't have to bear the brunt of accounts that are not actually target accounts or leads that are not actually the persona we want to reach out to, be it on a system scale or on a more one-to-one scale, depending on your motion, right? And I think it's that it's in different parts of the organization that this even, okay, it's cool, but do we really need it? When you look at it holistically at the organization, it's so powerful to have data that you can trust, that teams want to act on, and when they act on it, they have the highest chance of succeeding because it actually can go anywhere, and it's worth the effort. That's incredibly powerful.
Agreed. Okay, curious where you would try and caution the viewers on areas where AI is overhyped. I've seen so many posts where, for example, one of the most common posts that unfortunately does super well on LinkedIn is, my CRM cleanup project used to take 3 months, a quarter to do. Now it's done in 5 minutes. I just gave Claude write permissions to my CRM and said, go and just basically let Claude run wild with write permissions in the CRM. It seems nice. Here's the skills. Here's the agents. I already built it for you. Just go for it. I find that really is scary. I would be nervous to do that in production with my CRM data. That's just one example I could think of. I'm curious where you think people are maybe where you or you've seen folks make big mistakes with AI or invest in something that didn't come to fruition. But essentially, where GTM leaders should proceed with caution with AI and GTM.
I love the question, and I think, so this is how I look at it. Based on what I'm seeing, and it's a little bit odd because it's also what I'm building, so whatever, but based on what I'm seeing, AI in GTM is not overhyped. It's actually quite the opposite. I personally stand by that. I think any organization can have an order of magnitude changes, maybe not 10x the revenue just by doing some GTM stuff, but you can create massive efficiencies in each GTM org. So I don't think AI is overhyped. What I would say though is the framing of AI is overhyped. It overlooks that. I don't think it's overhyped, but I think it's much harder to get to great results with AI than it looks on the surface. Maybe I didn't super succinctly put that, but I think AI in GTM, if used well, can fulfill the promise and overfulfill, but it's much harder to actually get there. The biggest problem I see for myself and in AI and GTM is this draw to do more stuff. I have 6 terminal windows open and it's okay, I want to do this, but that would be better if I also build this. And then you build something in your system routine and you build an additional thing for the client that you do first before you do this. It's this drawing a line and saying, no, I'm not going to build this. And, and in an extended way, pushing back really hard of, are we going down the right rabbit hole with this? Is this a thing we should really start? Because if we start and if it involves AI and it has a certain level of complexity to it, it will be something that needs bandwidth from you, it needs bandwidth from me. And what I'm seeing is that it's easy to start, but then things lose steam a little bit, but you need to see it through to the end. Success with AI, 100% for any org within reach, but it's hard work.
It sounds like you're saying that AI, the dream outcome, I like Hermosa's value equation. I think I mentioned to you last time we caught up that there's the dream outcome and the likelihood of achievement multiplied together on top. Basically how awesome it would be and how attainable this is on top, divided by the cost or sacrifice to get there and the time delay. And it sounds like you're saying the actual dream outcome of how good this could be actually is real, but people underestimate perhaps the amount of work it would take to get there. And also that, people underestimate the time it would take to get there, the work it takes to get there. And also that it's actually easy to, because it's so awesome, it's easy to just go in a million different directions. Yeah. And the real key with implementing AI in your org is having your priorities straight and being sure that what you're building is actually the right thing, because now it's so easy to build an app in half an hour or a few hours.
It's also why I think I'm happy to be on the consulting side and not on the selling software side of things, because I think the value comes from, and that doesn't apply to all things, right? I would argue few companies need exactly what I have to offer. For some, just a point solution or an established software to do the thing they want to do is probably good enough for the beginning, but the real, this is amazing, comes from actually walking the walk and fine-tuning these things. Because when you think about, so many things get better when the data flow has awareness of the market you're actually operating in. And yes, any software tool can scrape your website and do some inference on what's your ICP, and that, I don't want to make too small of that. So that probably can get you 80% of the way there. That being said, when you remember the beginning, I worked with small TAM, high ACV companies. I think for the companies where it matters to not only push very quickly to 80%, but maybe a little bit slower, but to 95% of coverage or accuracy or whatever you want to use for that, I think that is where the gold lies, in where you can AI make really shine, because then you can work around a lot of edge cases and it can do all the beautiful things with unstructured data. And basically everything in GTM is a mix of semi-structured, unstructured, or structured data. And it's just incredible to be able to add the unstructured and semi-structured parts into whatever you want to do. The structured stuff you could always do, but now it's this whole world of things that basically needed to look at things, what it means one by one, and now you can do that.
Yeah, I feel like my job essentially comes down to asking people the right questions and capturing their answers in a structured or semi-structured format.
You're so right on that. And one thing with the posts that you said, I totally see what you're saying there, and I get a little bit of FOMO with that, because am I just too stupid? But when you peel back on a first principles basis, what needs to happen to achieve a certain outcome? When you don't at least do some amount of, okay, let's build this together deliberately, you have a lot of, I know this sounds very theoretical, I would love to be able to show this, but when you do something, and by the way, DeepLine does really cool shit, no question about it. You can beep that out, right? And there's a lot of amazing stuff you can do just by prompting Claude Code to do certain stuff, but it's super intransparent what's actually happening. Yes, you can see all the steps when you dig into it, but it's very different from manufacturing this data pipeline where you actually understand, oh, this part comes from there, and you don't have to ask an LLM where does it come from, but you can actually see it. I think there's still some value in that. And when you think about how often do you get mislabeled ground truth data when what you just talked about, classifiers, let's say you want to ingest, which is the best way, a data set of true positives, true negatives. I have not once gotten a list where I was told, oh, this is 100 true positives and true negatives, where it was actually 100 true positives and true negatives. There's maybe best case, it's a 95% thing, sometimes it's a 90% thing. And what actually happens is AI not only can use this to build a system that can, based on the data we have, build that for a whole market, but it oftentimes also catches the mistakes, but you
I've had times where it's this is wrong. Oh wait, no, it's not. I was right. This was wrong, and I'm wow, this is
totally
crazy.
and you only, and the way I look at it, maybe that changes over time, whatever. But the way I look at it, you only get there with a human in the loop step on the important things. And this is why I like to be in consulting on this and not selling a software, because he can walk this extra mile.
Okay, cool. Final question. I guess final topic is let's say you just met a marketing or sales leader at a B2B company, and they're hearing all the hype about AI. Maybe they have budget to spend, and they don't know what to do. Aside from book a demo with both of us, no, I'm kidding. But what would be your advice to them? Where should they focus? Should they, in terms of how to get, I guess to frame the question a bit better, I can imagine if I was in their shoes, I would be seeing tons of people posting about crazy workflows on LinkedIn, Claude Code being super hyped up. Clearly, ZoomInfo and the other traditional stack is not working, but they might not know, okay, what do I do instead? I don't really know where to go. I'm not a software engineer. I don't know how to use GitHub. I don't even know what GitHub is. I really go down the direction. What would be your advice for them to actually successfully move the needle with AI for their GTM organization?
Big one. Okay, as brief as I can. I think this should not be an initiative on the marketing side, on the sales side. I think what you were talking about, of course, depending on company size, but let's say we talk about early stage up to Series B, Series C, something like that, right? Anything on that spectrum. I think these have to be CEO or CRO initiatives. First thing. If it's not on that level of importance for the company, they don't have problems worth solving in GTM. And I mean that in a positive way, right? Then they have other construction sites. No, that's a German idiom. But then they have other things to fix first and not this. This, in my opinion, has to be important enough that the CRO wants to understand what's happening, wants to control what's happening, wants to be involved, and is able and wants to spend time on that. If you build it on a department side, I think it's already destined to fail, because you will, if you do it well, touch other parts of the organization. And if I, as a vendor in this instance, have to convince another department to do certain things, or maybe something just changes on their side and you want buy-in, or you need information, if that's already a fight that has to be fought, it's too much of an uphill battle. So this is one thing. So get your CRO in, is what I want to say, I think, with that. The other thing is, I think people have a pretty good understanding of what at the moment would have the highest impact, but they just never attempted to do it. Maybe because it wasn't possible before, or it was just not a big problem before. But there's where I would say, when you look at, is it top of funnel, is it mid funnel, is it bottom of the funnel? What is the thing, if we solve it, if we hire somebody and as a thought experiment, they do a perfect job, how does our world change? And if that change is not meaningful, it's not a problem worth solving. But if it is something, if we only had this perfectly done, and that is a meaningful change, or has a chance to be a meaningful change, that is something I would ask somebody to scope a solution for. And of course, hopefully that person will come in and say, hey, are we even solving the right problem? Maybe there's something completely different. Maybe you should buy versus build. because it's essentially built when we come in, right? And maybe buying is the better thing. You would have to look at that. But what really select the battles very carefully. You can't try to solve everything, that won't work. I think it should be foundations first and absolute foundational data, then anything other tactical on top of that, and that all should be problems worth solving, which I would argue probably the top 3 problems you can come up with.
Nice. So it sounds like you're saying, first of all, the visibility should be pretty high on this in terms of the corporate. You should have or someone high up in leadership on board and behind you. And you should also really pick your battles carefully in terms of, is this really worth doing? How do I know? What would the end state look, and what would the impact be, perhaps in time savings or pipeline increase or whatever you're measuring the KPI with? And if it's something meaningful, then you should probably do it, but bring in someone who knows what they're doing.
That person should ask, that person will have to have you explain why they are hiring you for this. Why are you looking for this? Is that I feel this is a good thing to, I feel always fortunate that I can mentally go easy in these things, that I'm quote unquote happy to sell myself out, because I want my clients to be happy and I want what I build to actually make sense for them, right? Otherwise, it's just something that will just unravel over time, and that's not great for anybody. So I would look for pushback to understand, is it really the right thing solving? That is, I think, a good indicator of somebody taking my success seriously. And I also want to acknowledge this stuff is all super hard to buy. Where do you look? Where do you find people? I don't know. For me, it's always personal intros, right? So the way I would even look at it is look around in your GTM network. Who of your peers in similar companies, similar roles, talks about, hey, we were working with somebody or an agency or a company that has built something that really works for us, and try to get in touch with people this way. When you do it, LinkedIn first, I think it's very hard to separate signal from noise when you don't really know what signal and noise. And I have a hard time seeing that when I see others' posts. How would a non-involved, or not non-involved, but somebody who's not living in this, you and I, how would they know who's full of it and who actually brings something to the table? So I really think listening for recommendations in your network of somebody who has really seen something built for them well by somebody, I think that's a good vector to go into.
Right on. Okay, thank you. I really appreciate you taking the time to sit down and chat about these things. Hopefully some of the listeners find that useful. Thank you. Where can people find you if they want to get in touch?
I don't even have a website, so it's really just LinkedIn and just my name, Andreas Wernicke, Wernicke, and I'm mostly on LinkedIn.
Okay, great. Awesome. So that's the show. If you found it useful, please subscribe at sculpted.agency/newsletter. That's where I always ship new episodes first, along with all of our guides, Claude playbooks, tutorials, etc. You'll join the inside list and get access to all of my content first for free. And by the way, as a quick reminder, if your sales team is still struggling, working the wrong accounts, and it's costing you pipeline, that is exactly the problem that we solve at Sculpted. You can book an intro call with me at sculpted.agency and we'll get started on the problem immediately, or you can just reach out on LinkedIn and we can discuss further. Looking forward to it. Cheers.